My dad's voice cut through the Christmas music like glass shattering on the floor. The lights on the tree flickered, the silver ornaments trembling as if they could feel what was coming. My mom froze with a serving spoon in her hand, the mashed potatoes dripping onto the tablecloth. Caroline's husband reached for the gravy like nothing had happened. And me? I just lifted my glass of red wine, took a slow sip, and said, "Okay, fine, don't call me again." No one spoke after that. Even the old clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. The smell of roasted turkey hung heavy in the air, mixed with something sour, like guilt. I pushed back my chair, and the sound of wood scraping the floor was louder than any shout. I didn't slam the door. I just walked out of the house my money had been paying for, step by step, until the cold air hit my face. What were you doing the last time someone told you that you were dead to them? Tell me in the comments. For me, I just kept walking into the snow, pretending the sting in my chest was from the wind. The night sky was heavy and gray, the kind that hides the stars but makes the Christmas lights shine brighter. They glowed red and green in the reflection of my car window, and for a moment, I watched my own face flicker in the glass. I looked calm, but my hands were shaking. Inside that house, behind those perfect curtains, I had just stopped being their daughter. The street was silent, except for the crunch of snow under my boots. I could still hear the echo of my dad's voice in my head. Dead to me. It wasn't the first time he'd said something cruel, but it was the first time I believed him. I slid into my car, started the engine, and watched the frost melt off the windshield. In the rearview mirror, the house looked peaceful, almost beautiful. You'd never know that the family inside it had just torn itself apart. I drove without a destination. The heater groaned, and the radio hummed a Christmas classic about peace on earth. I almost laughed. Peace was something I hadn't felt in years. My dad had always said family meant loyalty, but his version of loyalty meant silence. It meant sitting through dinners where Carolyn, my older sister, was the golden child, and I was the background noise. She could do no wrong. Her husband Mark ran my dad's old construction company now, and even though everyone knew business was going downhill, they still toasted to her success. Meanwhile, my job as a director at a learning center for kids with special needs was treated like a hobby. My dad used to tell people I worked with children who couldn't fit in. He said it like it was charity, not work. He didn't know that those kids had taught me more about patience, resilience, and quiet strength than he ever could. He didn't know that I was the one who'd been sending $10,000 every month to help Mom cover their bills, pretending the money came from Caroline's company profits. He didn't know because Mom begged me not to tell him. She said his pride couldn't take it, that he still thought Caroline's company was thriving. I kept my promise, even when it hurt. I told myself I was protecting her, not him. But sometimes I wondered if protecting her meant letting him keep his illusions. The wind howled against the car as I pulled into my apartment building. I sat there for a while, staring at my phone, watching it light up again and again. Mom, Caroline, unknown number. I didn't answer. I knew what they would say. Mom would cry and tell me I'd gone too far. Caroline would ask me to apologize so things could go back to normal. But normal had always meant swallowing my pain and smiling through it. I finally turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and climbed out. The air smelled like snow and smoke from someone's fireplace. I walked up the steps to my apartment, the sound of my boots muffled by the thick layer of ice. Inside, the lights from the city flickered through my blinds, casting stripes of red and gold across the floor. I set down my keys and leaned against the wall, my breath coming out in short bursts. For 3 years, I'd been paying for their comfort. $10,000 a month. $120,000 a year. I'd told myself it was love, that family meant helping even when it hurt. But what I'd really been buying was peace. And tonight, I realized peace can't be bought. Not from people who use your heart as a wallet. I walked into my kitchen and poured another glass of wine. My reflection in the window looked older, harder. I could still hear my dad's voice echoing from dinner. You think you're better than your sister because you work with those broken kids. You wouldn't last a day in the real world. And then Mom's voice, sharp but shaky. Stop embarrassing your sister. I remembered the way Caroline had smiled at me. The kind of smile that said, "I told you so." That smile had been there since childhood. Every time I earned straight A's, while she barely passed. She'd always had a way of turning my accomplishments into background noise. And Dad always applauded her for trying her best. I'd tried to laugh it off tonight, to let it slide again. But when he said those words, when he called me dead to him, something in me just snapped loose. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I finished the glass, rinsed it in the sink, and opened my laptop. The glow from the screen lit up the kitchen. My cursor hovered over my online banking app. The automatic transfer was scheduled for the 1st of January. $10,000 to Eleanor Thomas, my mom. I stared at it for a long time, then clicked cancel. A small box popped up asking, "Are you sure?" Yes, I was sure. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. I closed the laptop and leaned back, feeling an odd calm settle in my chest. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the city in white. I wondered if the roads to my parents' house were already buried. Maybe that was for the best. I turned off my phone before going to bed, but the screen still glowed faintly in the dark, showing the last message from Mom. "Please, Helen, call me." He didn't mean it, but he did. And deep down, she knew it too. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight bouncing off the snow outside. My apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the heater. I made coffee and opened the blinds. For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't know what would come next. Maybe the silence. Maybe the fallout. Maybe both. As I sipped my coffee, my phone lit up again. 32 missed calls. 15 messages. My heart thudded once, hard. I haven't opened them yet. I just stood there, staring at the light breaking through the window. The kind that makes everything look cleaner, sharper, almost new. He said I was dead to him, but maybe, just maybe, this was what being alive finally felt like. Morning light slid across my floor like a soft hand, and for a breath, I forgot what happened at Christmas dinner. Then the quiet reminded me. I lay still and watched dust float in the beam, the way snow drifted the night I walked out. The phone on my nightstand hummed once, then gave up. I did not touch it. Silence was a relief with a sting, like antiseptic on a wound that finally needed air. I made coffee and stood at the window while the kettle murmured. The city wore a thin coat of ice, the kind that makes tires whisper and people step carefully. I thought of my dad's words as if they were printed on the frost. Dead to me. It was a sentence that had been waiting years to be spoken. It did not surprise me as much as it released something I had kept tied up. Tight, I breathed out and felt the knot loosen. On the dresser sat a framed photo of the three of us from a long time ago. Dad in an expensive suit with his chin lifted high. Caroline with a gloss of promise on her face. Me with a cap and gown and a smile that wanted to believe. It was the day I finished at Michigan State. He shook my hand the way men do at networking events. Later, he took Caroline to dinner to talk about the company's future. Mom told me she was tired, and we split a sandwich at the kitchen table. She pushed the pickle toward me and said I was always the practical one. I laughed because it was easier than saying what I felt. I grew up in Grand Rapids, in a neighborhood where bicycles leaned against front porches and dads mowed lawns in crisp lines on Saturdays. My dad ran Thomas & Lake, a construction firm, with billboards along the highway and glossy brochures in the bank lobby. His hard hat sat on a hook near the garage door like a crown. People shook his hand the way they shake the hand of a man who builds things that stand against wind and time. He liked that. He liked being the man who made the skyline. Caroline played piano in a pink dress and always had a solo at the winter recital. When she finished, Dad stood up before the applause even started. When my turn came at the school science fair, he checked his watch and asked how long it would be. He told me hard work mattered most, then told Caroline she had a natural gift. His eyes lit up when she walked into a room. With me, his attention was measured in minutes. I learned to do well without being seen. It was not a tragedy at first. It was air. You breathe it and move on. The year I turned 14, he took Caroline to the office to bring your child to work day. I waited by the door with my backpack packed and a peanut butter sandwich. Inside, he said the conference room would be boring and promised next time. Next time did not come. Mom sat with me at the kitchen table while I drew floor plans in a notebook and pretended his world was mine too. She refilled my lemonade and said, "Your dad loves you in his own way." I believed her the way a girl believes a weather report. Maybe the storm will pass. Maybe the sun will be out by noon. By the time senior year came, I knew I would not fit into the company he imagined. I wanted something that made sense inside my chest. In a volunteer club, I met a boy named Theo who did not speak for the first 3 visits. On the 4th, we hummed Jingle Bells together without words. He held the tune, just a little off, and watched my mouth follow. His mother cried into her scarf and said thank you without sound. I drove home with the car radio off and knew what I wanted more than the skyline. I wanted the soft work that becomes solid inside people you cannot see at a distance. I told my dad I wanted special education. He said the words slowly, as if tasting something that had gone bad. He asked why I would study to take care of children who might never grow up to carry anything real. He said the company needed an operations mind and numbers that add up and a family member with grit. I said the kids had grit. He said grit is lifting steel beams in February wind. I said grit is trying again after 50 failed attempts at a single syllable. He picked up his keys and said he had a meeting. He did not come to my graduation ceremony for teaching. Mom brought a bouquet and a kiss on the cheek, and a card with both of their names in her handwriting. She said he had a flu, and I nodded as if it were weather again. At my first classroom, I brought in a second-hand rug and a cheap Bluetooth speaker and string lights, shaped like tiny stars. I learned how to wait without sighing. I learned to clap for a glance, to cheer for a single touch, to treat a half-word like a parade. I was never more tired. I was never more awake. Life did what life does. Dad retired and handed Thomas and Lake to Caroline and Mark. They threw a party at a country club with a dance floor that glowed underfoot. He made a toast to legacy and said nothing about the second daughter who was on call for the flu going around the center. Mom sent me a picture of him holding a glass high while confetti fell. I smiled at my phone and made macaroni and cheese in a foil pan for a boy named Jordan, who would only eat that for 3 weeks. I told myself the world is big enough for 2 kinds of pride. The first time Mom came to me about money, it was a Sunday in late fall, the kind of day where the gray hangs low enough to touch. She rang my doorbell with a paper grocery bag in her hands. She brought me a casserole and sat at my kitchen table with her fingers folded, so tightly her knuckles looked like marbles. She said they were behind on the property tax, and she had tried to shuffle things, and it would be a short-term squeeze. She said, "Please do not tell your dad. He believes the company will bounce back after the winter." I felt anger rise and settle, like a wave that breaks and then pulls back. It was not his pride I thought of first. It was her eyes. There was a fear there that looked older than the bill. I transferred $10,000 that afternoon. It was a number I could not say out loud without feeling like I had handed over part of my breath. I put a memo scholarship gift and told her to deposit it and to call it whatever she needed to call it. She cried, not in sobs, but in the small way a person does when shame and relief arrive at the same time. On the way out, she touched the photo on my hallway shelf and said, "You always were the practical one." I wondered when practicality became a synonym for invisible. 1 month became 3. 3 became 6. I told myself it was temporary. Winter projects lag. Spring will save them. Mark always looks like he has a plan. Each time I sent another $10,000, Mom sent back a thank you text with hearts she never used before. She asked about the kids at the center and told me Dad was sleeping better. She said Caroline was so busy with architects and bids that she barely ate. She did not say the numbers out loud. Neither did I. We had a pact, stitched out of silence and hope. Dad strutted through those months the way he always had. He called the old crew for lunch and told the manager he liked the good table. By the window, he bragged about new contracts that were really letters of intent, and potential investors who were really old friends who liked coffee. In group photos, he leaned forward with his hands spread wide. At home, he patted my shoulder and asked if the little ones were still coloring and singing the same songs. He said it with a laugh. He threw his head back and looked at the ceiling like he was kind to even mention it. Mom looked at her plate and refilled his glass. I kept working. A boy named Miguel said his first full sentence in April. He said, "I want the blue truck, please. Slow and careful. like he was walking across a stream of stones. The whole room held its breath and then broke into applause. I stepped into the supply closet and cried, where no one would see me. It was not sadness. It was awe, the kind that knocks you over gently. I drove home with the windows down and felt lighter than air for 8 minutes, until the stoplight near my parents' street. Summer came and Caroline threw a barbecue with glossy invitations that said, Morris Family Strong. Dad wore a polo shirt with his initials embroidered and took pictures with men who wore boat shoes and talked about margins like they were ball scores. He hugged Caroline and kissed her forehead and told her she was the spine of the legacy. He gave me a side hug and said he was proud I had found something that kept me busy. I ate potato salad and made polite conversation with a neighbor who told me, special education must be so fulfilling. She said the word with the softness of a tissue. I smiled and said, it is work, just like laying cement. You show up every day and you do it right. By the second year of transfers, I knew we had built a house on the wrong foundation. But by then, the habit felt like a set of train tracks. The money left my account the first of each month, and I tried not to look. When I did, I would whisper the number like a prayer I did not believe would be answered. At night, I watched videos of the kids practicing hand-over-hand motions, little steps that look like nothing until you put them in a line and call it a line. Life. I traded sleep for spreadsheets and told myself I was choosing grace. Sometimes grace looks a lot like fear of conflict. In the third year, Mom slipped. She called late when her voice got small. She said an investor had backed out and a city permit was delayed, and a supplier wanted a deposit. She said Mark was under so much pressure that he was not himself. She said Dad could not know because he would have a heart episode. She asked if I could help just this once. I said yes, even though we both knew it was not just once. After that call, I walked to the park behind my building and sat on a cold bench while the fountain clicked off for the night. I watched a couple walk their old dog in slow circles. The dog wore a bright red bandana and kept looking up at them as if every step was a treat. I wondered what it would feel like to be looked at that way by your own dad, with simple joy, with no ledger open in his head. There were moments when I wanted to tell the truth. At Thanksgiving that year, I almost did. Dad gave a toast to Caroline and Mark for keeping the family name shining. He said, a good daughter knows where she belongs. My fork clinked against my plate. Mom pressed her knee against mine under the table and whispered without sound, please. Later, she found me by the sink and asked me to keep the peace a little longer. I did. I told myself I was shielding her from shame, and him from the kind of collapse that makes old men smaller. What I did not admit was this. I was also protecting the part of me that still wanted a dad. As long as he believed the myth, I could pretend there was a version of us where he saw me. That myth snapped on Christmas like ice under a careless step. When he said those words, dead to me, the story I kept alive for him died for me too. I did not realize how heavy it was until I set it down. Back in my apartment with my empty coffee cup and the light on the snow, I opened the banking page and watched the record of my own choices stare back. 3 years, 36 transfers, 10,000 each. The numbers sat there, without apology or comfort. I pressed cancel on the next one. The screen asked if I wanted to proceed. I clicked yes and felt something unknot in my ribs. It was not a triumph. It was quiet. A thin new peace, stubborn as winter grass. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms flat on the counter. In the window, I saw myself the way you see someone through a windshield, there and not there. I thought of Tio humming without words, and Miguel asking for the blue truck, and Jordan's tired smile over macaroni and cheese. I thought of all the times Dad laughed at my job like it was a dollhouse. He measured worth in beams and bids and the way men clap each other on the bidge, back near a freshly poured foundation. I measured it in tiny, brave inches. The inches add up. The phone buzzed again. I let it. Snow began to fall in larger flakes, slow and heavy. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor started a washer and the pipes rattled softly behind the wall. I stood and listened, like a woman might listen to a heartbeat that has returned to a steady rhythm. I knew the next day would not stay quiet. I knew secrets do not lie down and sleep just because you ask them to. I knew the house he loved was braced by money I would not send again. I imagined the moment the truth would slip and crash at his feet. I imagined the look on his face when pride meets gravity. I turned off the kitchen light and let the room go dim. I told myself one true sentence before bed. I have done my part. Then I lay down and pulled the blanket up to my chin. Outside the city, I kept breathing. Inside my chest, the snow finally stopped. The call came just after noon, right when I was cleaning paint off the kids' hands after art class. I almost didn't answer, but when I saw Mom's name, something inside me clenched. I stepped into the hallway where the air smelled like disinfectant and winter coats. Her voice was trembling. "Helen, your dad knows." I leaned against the wall. "What do you mean he knows?" She said he saw a letter from the bank. They called the house about the canceled transfer. He's furious. I could hear the panic in her breath. "Please, can you come talk to him before he does something stupid?" For a moment, I didn't move. The hallway clock ticked once, loud enough to sound like judgment. I could hear laughter from inside the classroom. One of the kids was singing off-key, proud of it. I told Mom I'd call her back and hung up. My hands were cold, even though the heater was running. On the drive home, I rehearsed what I would say. I told myself I'd be calm, that I wouldn't cry or apologize, but by the time I turned onto my parents' street, my stomach was tight. The snow from last night had turned to slush. Their house looked the same as always. Clean bricks, trimmed hedges, an American flag fluttering weakly in the wind. I parked by the curb and sat there a minute, watching the front curtains move. When I walked in, the air was thick with tension, and the smell of coffee had gone bitter on the stove. Dad was standing by the dining table, the same one from Christmas, his face red and his hands gripping a folded bank statement. Mom sat on the couch with her fingers knotted in her lap. She looked up at me like someone who had been waiting for a storm to hit. He didn't say hello. He just held up the paper. "You canceled it," he said. $10,000. Just gone. For 3 years, this has been running under my name. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? I swallowed hard. "It makes you look human," I said quietly. He slammed the paper onto the table. "Don't get smart with me." Mom started to speak, but he cut her off. "You went behind my back. Both of you. Taking money from her is like some kind of charity case." He turned to Mom, his voice shaking. "You let me sit there thinking Caroline was keeping this family afloat while you two were playing secret benefactors." "It wasn't like that," I said. "I was trying to help." "Help?" he barked, like the word tasted bad. "Help? You made me a fool in my own house. What else have you been lying about?" I took a breath, but tried to keep my voice even. I wasn't lying. I was protecting Mom. Protecting me from what? The truth? That your sister's husband can't manage a business to save his life. Mom flinched at that. "Richard, please," she whispered, but he wasn't listening. He turned on me again, his eyes sharp and small. "You think your little teacher's salary gives you the right to look down on us? You think you're better because you work with those kids? Those broken kids?" His voice cracked on the word broken. Something inside me snapped. "They're not broken," I said. "They're learning. They're fighting. You don't know a thing about what I do." He laughed once, a dry sound that hit harder than shouting. "I know enough. I know you wasted your potential. You could have taken over the company, but no. You wanted to play social worker. You wanted applause for your big heart." I stared at him. Really stared. The man who once lifted me onto his shoulders to watch fireworks now looked like someone I wouldn't recognize in a crowd. The pride that used to make him stand tall had curdled into something else. Fear, maybe. Or shame. Mom reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "I told you, Eleanor. I told you she would turn on us one day. It's always the quiet ones." He looked back at me. "You walk in here acting like some savior. Do you know what that money did? It paid for this roof. This house, my prescriptions, your mother's car repairs. You made it look like charity." I took a step closer. "It wasn't charity. It was family. I did it because I love you." He shook his head. "No, you did it because you needed to feel superior. You can't stand that Caroline succeeded where you didn't. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Caroline succeeded? The company's falling apart, and everyone knows it. Mark's one bad month away from bankruptcy. His jaw tightened. "Don't you dare talk about your sister that way. She's the one trying to keep our legacy alive." Legacy. That word again. It hung between us like a curse. I felt something rise in my throat. Not anger, but years of swallowing it. You keep saying legacy, Dad, but all you've built is a story about who you wish you still were. You gave her the company because you thought she'd make you proud. She's drowning, and you can't even see it. He took a step toward me. Get out. His voice was low, but deadly calm. You're ungrateful. You always have been. You think giving us money buys you respect. It doesn't. You're dead to me. Mom gasped. Richard, stop. He turned to her. You knew she was feeding us like beggars. You sat there every month, smiling, letting me believe my own daughter was just visiting while she was running them. House like a landlord. I won't have it. I felt my throat tighten, my pulse drumming in my ears. I wanted to scream or cry or throw something, but instead, I stood there, hands steady at my sides, and said the only thing that came to me. Fine, I'm done. Mom stood, tears filling her eyes. Helen, please don't. He doesn't mean it, but he did. His face said everything words couldn't. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, he spoke again. Don't come back. Not for birthdays, not for funerals, not for anything. I paused with my hand on the knob. I looked back once and saw the picture of our family on the mantel, the one from my college graduation. He was smiling in that photo, hand on my shoulder. I wondered if he even remembered taking it. I walked out into the cold. The air hit me hard, almost sweet with the smell of pine and snow. I could hear his voice through the door, still raised, muffled now. Mom's softer voice trying to calm him. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The drive home was a blur. At a red light, I realized my hands were trembling. I thought of calling someone, maybe Lauren from work, but I couldn't find the words to explain what had just happened. How do you tell someone your dad buried you while you were still breathing? Back at my apartment, I kicked off my boots and sank into the couch. The city outside looked washed clean by the snow, untouched. Inside, I felt stripped bare. I kept thinking about his face, the way his eyes burned like he wanted to erase me. I thought about the years I'd spent sending money, lying to protect his pride, all so he could sit at dinner and toast to a fantasy. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Caroline. It read, Dad told me what happened. You really are something else. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I didn't answer. A second message came. He's furious, Helen. You should have known better than to humiliate him. Humiliate him. The words hit me harder than the fight itself. That was the story they were going to tell now. Not the truth about who paid the bills. Not the sleepless nights or the quiet sacrifices. Just another chapter where I was the problem. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Snow was falling again, soft and steady. Below, the streetlights glowed like candles. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and let the silence wrap around me. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Maybe they'd cut me off completely. Maybe Caroline would spin her version of the truth until everyone believed it. Maybe the entire town would. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. The last of the coffee on the table had gone cold. I picked it up, took a sip, and made a face at the bitterness. I sat back down and closed my eyes. The next morning, I would find out what silence could really stir up. Snow began before the sun, and the window wore a soft haze that made everything look kinder than it felt. I lay still and listened to the heater hum, then swung my feet to the floor and let the cold make me honest. Coffee helped. I watched steam curl from the mug while the street below turned white and slow. I told myself to keep this day simple. Breathe. Show up. Do not beg for what was never offered. The center was supposed to be closed, but my keys knew the lock by heart. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and crayons. I plugged in the string lights above the bulletin board, and the whole room softened. On my desk, a stack of crooked trees and wide blue stars waited for tape. I was pressing one to the window when small footsteps padded down the hall and Ben's grandmother guided him into the doorway. He held a folded card against his chest like something fragile and sacred. He studied my mouth carefully, the way he does when lining up sounds, then said, "Merry Christmas, Miss Helen." Each word was a stone laid into a cold stream, and he crossed it with both feet. Steady. The laugh came out of me before I could stop it, and his grandmother cried into her mitten. A soft, quick sound, while pressing an orange candy into my palm. I told her he built that bridge himself. I only held a flashlight. She said that was how midnight work always got done, and I tucked the candy into my pocket, like a promise. I turned off the lights one by one and felt the quiet ring in the hall. For a moment, I stood still and let the small miracle anchor me. Then I locked the door and stepped back into the thin winter light. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Mom's name glowed, and for a breath, I watched it blink as if time would buy me courage. I picked it up anyway. She said your dad is excited about tonight, and then said, please do not argue with him, and then asked me to wear something nice because he notices those things. She said the roast was already in, and the good table runner was pressed flat. She asked if I could bring the red wine I like because he will pretend to hate it and then ask for more. Her voice tried to sound bright. I asked if she was all right. She said she was fine and asked if I would be on time. I said I would. After the call, I opened the drawer where I keep envelopes, pens, and rubber bands. I slid out a clean white one and wrote 2 words in small, neat letters. Final gift. I lifted the checkbook that has too many torn stubs and filled one for $10,000. I put it in the envelope and sealed it with my thumb. The edge stuck to my skin like a thin weight. I set it by my keys and told myself that setting it down here meant setting something else down, too. This would be where I stopped paying for silence. I pulled a simple red dress from the closet and checked the hem against the light. I brushed my hair, pinned it up, let it fall, and pinned it again. Mascara softened my tired eyes. A warmer lipstick made me look like I had slept. In the mirror, I practiced a small, polite smile. From a distance, it reads as kindness. From the inside, it feels like a gate that can open and close without noise. The bottle of wine waited on the counter. I remembered a summer afternoon when Dad stood over a grill in a bright polo and bragged about Caroline running meetings like a general. He glanced at me and asked if my little projects were still keeping me busy, and I smiled and tasted dill and mustard and held my tongue like a utensil that serves without shining. I slid the bottle into a bag and knotted the top. The drive was quiet except for the windshield wiper's metronome. Streets were 2 gray lines cut through white. Every few blocks, a lawn reindeer leaned in the wind as if listening for something that never arrived. I passed the supply store where Dad used to shake hands with men in canvas jackets who knew how to read weather by feel. I passed the post office where Mom buys stamps in sheets because she likes how neat they look before the first tear. I passed the dark windows of Thomas and Lake. The sign was still crisp. The rooms behind it looked hollow, as if someone had lifted the furniture and left the shadows behind. At a red light, I opened the note in my phone where I keep sentences for hard. Days. You do not have to explain your work. He has already decided what counts. You do not have to argue legacy. A legacy that demands your silence does not deserve your voice. You can leave early. You can leave without apologizing. I read them twice and put the phone away. Their house appeared through falling snow. Brick and tidy, the big maple clutching a few stubborn brown leaves. The driveway was shoveled in 2 clean tracks. The upstairs light in my old room glowed a warm yellow that felt like a memory, trying too hard. I sat with both hands on the wheel and watched the curtains I knew by heart. The front steps were dusted with powder. I pictured Mom shaking sidewalk salt from her palm like seasoning. I pictured Dad at the dining room doorway with his hands on his hips, the old posture of a man who likes decisions more than questions. I pictured Caroline straightening a fork so a picture would look right on her phone. I slid the envelope into my coat pocket and tucked the wine under my arm. The air was a bit sweet and sharp when I opened the car door. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed, bright and clean, and the sound lifted the hairs along my arms. The snow fell a little under my boots and squeaked like new rubber soles in a... Every step felt deliberate, a small ceremony performed for myself. At the hedge, I paused. Snow rested on each clipped branch and rounded every hard edge. Inside the house, music braided with the low murmur of the news. The roast and butter smell rolled out faint and familiar. I stood at the door and laid my palm on the cold paint. I counted 3 breaths the way I teach my kids. In through the nose, slow and steady. Out through the mouth. You can leave any time, I told myself. She needs you to come in once. He needs you to nod once without surrender. You can be kind without being quiet. I knocked. The sound traveled into the hallway the way a pebble starts a ripple. The latch turned almost immediately. Mom opened the door with a smile that was hopeful and practiced. Her cheeks were pink from the oven heat. She took my arm and drew me inside as if the cold would cling if she did not. "Move quickly. You look lovely," she said, and then asked if I was freezing and told me to come in before the neighbors saw me shiver. She was already talking toward the kitchen about rolls and timers. I could see the table behind her, the good clothes, the runner with tiny gold pines, the china that only comes out when we are telling ourselves a story about being fine. Dad stood by the buffet, arranging the carving knives like medals. He glanced up and gave a nod that looked generous from across a room. Caroline came in from the kitchen with a platter and set it down. Too firm at first, then gentler, as if she could smooth the moment afterward. Mark hovered near the mantel and adjusted a frame as though the picture could change its own past if it sat straighter. I slid off my coat and shook a thread of snow from the hem. The envelope shifted in the pocket, and I felt its thinness like a truth you cannot ignore and cannot say yet. Mom pressed a glass into my hand. "More water than wine." "Pace yourself," she whispered, so softly it was almost breath, then moved away to the oven and checked a timer that did not really need checking. I told her the tree looked beautiful. I told her the music was nice. She told me to sit and be a guest for once. I smiled and did not say that guests do not keep the lights on and guests do not carry a last check that will cover the month when pride runs short. Caroline started a story about a client who wanted a window cut where a window cannot go, and how Mark charmed the city inspector with a sketch and a promise. Dad laughed and called it leadership. Mom said the rolls were almost done. I offered to help, and she shook her head and told me to enjoy myself. The word enjoy felt foreign in my mouth, like a vowel from a language I had not practiced in years. Dad moved behind his chair the way a man takes a small stage. His hand rested on the chair back, and his jaw set in a way I have known since childhood. There was already a flush at his cheekbones and a tired pride in his eyes. I set the wine near the water pitcher and sat at my place. The runner had a crease that would not quite lie flat. The candle flame leaned toward a draft I could not feel. For a second, everything seemed balanced on a thin edge of air. Mom brushed my shoulder as she passed behind me and left the light touch there, like a stamp. I folded my napkin and laid it across my lap. I could feel my heart, but it was not racing. It was a present. I thought of the hallway at the center, and the way quiet can sound like a bell when you have worked for it. I thought of the blue truck sticker on Ben's card, and the way he had set each word down like a gift. I thought of the envelope resting in my pocket, the last in a long line, and how sometimes the only way to give is to stop. Chairs scraped in a familiar chorus as everyone settled. Forks chimed softly against plates. Outside, the wind shifted and knocked a little snow from the maple. Dad lifted his glass. The room leaned toward him without anyone moving. I picked up mine and watched the water tremble at the lip. The candlelight flickered and brushed gold along the rim of the china. Somewhere, faint, the news anchor's voice faded as if even he knew to be quiet. I drew a breath and held it a second longer than usual. The air tasted like rosemary and heat, and a memory that has learned to behave. Then I let it out and set my shoulders down, ready for whatever came next. Dad lifted his glass, and I knew the peace would not hold. He was already talking before the rest of us could breathe. His voice carried that old tone of victory, the one that used to fill boardrooms and barbecues. Legacy, family, strength, words he wore like armor. He gave Caroline the smile reserved for golden children. She met it with her practiced laugh. Mark leaned back in his chair, too proud to notice the crack in her posture. Mom sat rigid, twisting her napkin in her lap. I stayed still, the glass cold in my hand, and waited for him to finish. Then he looked at me. "You should take notes, Helen. Maybe one day you'll understand what real responsibility looks like." Mom whispered something under her breath, but he ignored her. I watched the candlelight slide across his glass and thought about all the years I had mistaken that glare for warmth. I said I understood responsibility just fine. I said I'd been living it quietly for years. He smirked. "Working with special kids, right? Coloring books and sing-alongs? You always did like easy work." Caroline laughed a little too loudly, maybe trying to break the tension, maybe just playing her part. The sound hit like static. I felt heat rise in my chest. I said it wasn't easy. Teaching children who can't speak takes more patience than running any company. Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Patience doesn't build empires. Action does. You had a chance to be part of something bigger, but you threw it away. Mom's hand twitched toward his arm, but she didn't stop him. She never did. I asked if his empire was still standing as tall as he believed. His eyes flicked up, sharp and warning. What are you getting at? I told him he should check the company accounts. I told him Thomas and Lake weren't doing as well as he thought. The air froze. Caroline's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Mark's face went pale. Dad's voice dropped, low and deadly. What did you just say? I kept my voice even. I said maybe he should ask where the money's been going these past few years. He stood up so fast the chair legs screeched. You don't know what you're talking about. I said I did, that I'd been helping Mom cover the difference, that I'd sent $10,000 every month for 3 years to keep this family afloat. Mom's eyes filled before the words even sank in. Caroline turned toward her, stunned. You what? Dad's face turned a color I'd never seen on a human being. You gave us money? Behind my back? He slammed his palm on the table. You made me look like a fool in my own house. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, heavy and tight. Then I said I was trying to protect them. Protect us? His voice cracked. From what? The truth? Mark finally spoke, his voice thin. So that's how the bills got paid. Dad turned on him, furious. Don't you start. Then he looked back at me. You think I needed your charity? It wasn't charity, I said. It was helpful. He shook his head. You're lying. You're doing this to embarrass me. I looked at Mom, but she couldn't meet my eyes. Her hands were trembling, napkins shredded in her fingers. Dad pressed on, louder now. My own daughter is making me a charity case. I built this family from the ground up. You think you can buy your way into respect? You're nothing but... He stopped, himself. But the room had already heard enough. I stood. The chair legs scraped softly. I said I wasn't buying respect. I was done begging for it. Mom reached for me. Helen, please. Dad's voice dropped to a growl. Get out. The word hit harder than a slap. He pointed toward the door. You're ungrateful. After everything I gave you, get out of my house. Mom tried to rise, but he barked her name and she froze. Caroline whispered, Dad, stop. But he didn't even hear her. You're dead to me, he said. His voice was calm now. Too calm. You hear me? Dead. Something inside me went still. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. The envelope in the pocket rustled. Fine, I said. Don't call me again. The air in the room shifted. Carolyn's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Mark kept staring at the table like if he didn't move, the storm might pass. I looked at Mom one last time. Her eyes begged for peace, for someone to undo what had already been done. I reached for her hand. She flinched before she let me hold it. I slipped the envelope into her palm. Use it for what you need, I whispered. She nodded, lips trembling. Then I walked out. The cold outside was instant, biting. Snow was falling harder now, the kind that sticks to your lashes. My boots sank into it with each step. Behind me, voices rose inside the house. Mom's, pleading. Dad's, sharp and cutting. Caroline shouting something I couldn't make out. I reached the car and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel. The window fogged with my breath. Inside, their shadows moved like ghosts behind the curtains. For a moment I thought I might cry, but the tears never came. I just felt empty, like a wall that had finally cracked after holding too much weight. I turned the key, and the engine coughed awake. The headlights caught the snowflakes, small and wild in the beam. As I drove off, the house shrank in the mirror, until it was just light behind falling white. The roads were slick. I drove slowly, past the church where Mom lights candles, past the office that still carried our family name. It looked hollow now, like a body without breath. The sign gleamed anyway, proud and meaningless. At a red light, I let my forehead rest against the steering wheel. My breath fogged the glass. I could still hear his words echoing. Dead to me. Dead to me. Each repetition losing power. until they sounded almost like freedom. When I pulled into my apartment lot, the world was silent except for the wind. I carried the wine upstairs, even though I had no one to drink it with. The apartment was still, warm, real. I dropped my keys on the counter and exhaled. My phone buzzed on the table. Caroline's name. I didn't answer. Then a message. "You really are something else, Helen. He's furious. You should have kept your mouth shut." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then another came through. "You've ruined everything." I set the phone face down. The sound of the heater filled the room, steady and low. I took off my coat. The pocket was lighter now without the envelope. I stood at the window and looked down at the street. Snow covered everything evenly. No favorites, no judgment. My reflection stared back at me, soft and tired. For a moment, I could still see the girl who tried to earn her dad's approval one small kindness at a time. But she was fading. What remained was quieter, stronger. I sat on the couch and listened to the hum of the city under the snow. My hands were still cold. I wrapped them around the mug I had left that morning and found it empty. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, then fell silent. I watched it fade like a warning swallowed by distance. Tomorrow would come with noise, I knew. There would be fallout. There always is when truth cracks a wall. But tonight, there was only quiet. The kind that hurts first, then heals. I leaned back, eyes closed, and let it settle. Outside, the world kept snowing. Inside, something in me finally stopped shaking. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like mine. Morning slid in on a pale ribbon of light, and my phone started buzzing like a trapped bee on the nightstand. I let it go to vibration number 5 before I picked it up. Missed calls stacked in a column. Mom, Caroline, unknown number. A voicemail from a detective with a calm voice and a local callback. Texts kept arriving in clusters. The screen looked frantic. I set it face down and poured coffee with hands that were steadier than last night. When I finally looked again, the top message was from Aunt Linda. "Call me as soon as you can. The police are at your parents' house." Another from a neighbor down the block who still had my number from the summer. "We organized a yard sale. Lights, sirens. Your dad is saying someone hacked them." I stared at the words until the meaning clicked into place. I called Aunt Linda first. She answered breathlessly. "Officers everywhere, Helen. Your dad is pacing. He thinks someone broke into their accounts. He says the security system reset and the alarm went crazy at 6. Your mom is shaking. She says to please call." I asked if anyone was hurt. She said no, only pride. Then she lowered her voice like the kitchen had ears and said this would be easier if you came over. I thanked her and said I needed a minute, which was the truth, and also not the whole truth. I put the mug down and opened my laptop instead. The banking page blinked back with its simple lines. The automatic transfer was canceled with a clean gray stamp. I checked the other accounts, the ones I had set up for their internet, their streaming bundle, the cloud backup Dad never learned to use. I removed my card from each one and typed a short note of responsibility, returned to the account holder. My fingers moved like they had done this before, which they had, only in the opposite direction. The phone buzzed again and again. I listened to one voicemail because curiosity is louder than resolve in the ear. First hour after a rupture. It was Mom. Her voice wavered and tried to be firm. "Your dad does not feel well. He is very upset. If you care about us, come sort this out. Give them the passwords. Restore the payments. We can talk about your hurt later." There was a clatter, then a second voice, Caroline, sharp and clipped, saying, "This is going too far." The message ended with a long breath that sounded like a door closing. I did not call back. Instead, I walked to the window and watched the street lift itself awake under new snow. A plow groaned past. A man in a blue coat took his dog out, and the dog lifted its paws high like. The snow was a surprise. Somewhere in another apartment, a radio played a hymn too softly to identify. The world carried on as if one house on one block was not unraveling. By 8, my cousin Natalie texted, "Heads up, the police are telling your dad this looks like a family dispute, not a crime. Your mom just told them about the monthly money." I sat down on the arm of the couch as if my knees had decided for me. Natalie sent another line. She said it in front of everyone. 3 years, $10,000 a month. She was crying. Your dad went very still. He kept repeating that cannot be true. I did not know whether the pressure in my chest was relief or grief. After years of secrecy, the truth had finally walked into daylight. It did not feel triumphant. It felt like stepping out of a too tight shoe and seeing the indent it left on your skin. The detective called again and I answered. He sounded kind and careful, a man trained to speak around bruises. He said they were responding to a report of possible fraud and a break-in via the home security app. He said it appeared to be a misunderstanding within the family. He asked if I had access to the accounts. I said I had. He asked if I had changed anything overnight. I said I had removed my payment information from services I had been covering and had canceled the upcoming transfer to my mother. He asked if I had done anything to compromise the home alarm. I said I had initiated a factory reset to remove my credentials and had provided no further access. He paused and said thank you for the clarity. He said no crime had occurred. He said emotions were high. He said if I needed to make a statement later, I could. I thanked him and told him I would not be coming by the house. When I hung up, a new text sat waiting from Dad. It was a single line. Restore everything by noon or you will answer for this. Another followed. Gary says this is elder abuse. He did not sign his name. He did not need to. His voice was in the sentences, all sharp corners. I typed a reply and erased it twice. Finally, I wrote one sentence. I will not be paying your bills anymore. I hit send and turned the phone to silent. At 9, the doorbell rang and I froze like the sound could split the morning. It was only a delivery, a package the center had rerouted to my place. New visual schedules for January. I signed with a pen that wrote too dark and carried the box to the kitchen. On the counter, I opened it and ran my fingers along the laminated cards. Pictures of brushing teeth. Pictures of hands washing. Pictures of quiet hands. Pictures finished. I made another coffee and stood with the cup warm against my palms. I thought about finishing. Finishing did not mean anger. Finished meant complete. It meant no more secret bank drafts at midnight. It meant no more pretending my job was a charade so his pride could keep its shape, Natalie called. I answered. She spoke softly, like someone talking in the back pew during a service. He is sitting there with his hands on his knees like he is waiting for the doctor. Your mom keeps saying this was never supposed to be humiliating. Aunt Linda is making tea for the officers like it is Sunday afternoon. They are all pretending there is a script for this. I told her I was all right. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told Mom I hope she uses the envelope wisely. Tell her I will talk when people stop shouting. Natalie said I will. Then she said something that lodged in my throat. She said, I am proud of you. When we hung up, I wrote an email, just a few paragraphs. I addressed it to Mom and Dad and copied Aunt Linda and Natalie so the words would not be twisted in retellings. I wrote that I had provided my parents with financial help for 3 years at $10,000 a month, and it also covered a number of household services. I wrote that I did so out of love and out of a desire to keep them comfortable during a difficult transition. I wrote that last night I was told I was dead by my dad and asked to leave. I wrote that today I was ending all financial support and returning responsibility to them. I wrote that there are no legal obligations that bind an adult child to pay their parents' bills, and that there will be no further threats entertained. I wrote that I need time away to consider any future contact. I did not write anger onto the page. I kept to the fact of it. I pressed send. Then I turned off the laptop and let the room be quiet again. My phone blinked once more with a new message from Caroline. She said, I cannot believe you did this to our family. She said, your self-righteousness is disgusting. She said, enjoy your little teacher's life. I did not answer. Another message arrived from Mom, only 3 words. Please come home. I put the phone face down and pressed my fingertips to my eyelids until stars pulsed there. By noon, the street outside had thawed into wet tire marks. The package of visual cards sat open like a small museum of ordinary courage. I ate toast standing up, and it tasted like nothing. The quiet stretched long and plain. For a few minutes I wondered if I should have gone to the house to witness the story. Truth landing. Then I pictured Dad's eyes and the way he had sliced the air with his hand, and I let the thought pass like a car I had no reason to follow. The detective called one last time. He said they were leaving. He said everyone was safe. He said he hoped the family would find a way through the conflict without more calls to the station. I thanked him and wished him a calm holiday. After we hung up, I stood very still and noticed that my shoulders had dropped an inch. Afternoon light cooled, and the apartment settled into a peace I did not trust yet. I made a small dinner I barely tasted and washed the single plate. I walked to the window and watched the sky go the color of steel. In the reflection, I saw my own face, not triumphant, not broken, only new. Somewhere, a church bell struck the hour. I counted it without thinking. My phone was quiet. My mind was not, but it was less loud than it had been. I could feel the edge of sleep somewhere ahead, like a shoreline I might reach, if I kept breathing. Tomorrow would bring the next wave of calls and talk and fallout. Tonight, I would keep the silence I had chosen. I turned off the kitchen light, and the window turned into a square of dusk. The room exhaled. I sat down and let the soft weight of the couch take me. Then I closed my eyes and listened to the heater murmur its steady song while the city outside learned how to be ordinary again. The next few days moved like thick air. My phone barely stopped buzzing, but I stopped checking. Silence became its own rhythm, one I could finally breathe in. The city turned slushy and gray. Christmas lights blinking through fog like they were trying to remember what celebration meant. I spent those hours at the center, fixing shelves, helping Ben stack blocks, smiling when he said the word good without help. The normalness of it all steadied me more than sleep ever could. On the third morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox, my mother's handwriting curved and shaky. I took it upstairs and let it sit on the counter for half an hour before opening it. Inside was a folded piece of stationery with holly printed along the edges. The first line was apology-shaped but did not use the word sorry. She wrote that things had gone too far, that your dad is not himself lately, that maybe we can sit down when things calm. Then she wrote, "Please don't cut ties for good. He misses you, even if he can't say it." At the bottom, she added a small note that stopped me. "Thank you for what you did for us." I never told him because I didn't want him to feel small. I folded the letter carefully and left it on the table. Her words carried both affection and the same quiet avoidance that had kept us trapped for years. She wanted peace without truth. I understood it, but I couldn't live there anymore. Later that day, Natalie called. She had become the only one who spoke like the world wasn't ending. She told me Dad was back to working part-time security at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Caroline and Mark were trying to secure new investors for the company. But rumors were spreading about unpaid taxes and a missing loan payment. She said Mom had been spending more time with Aunt Linda and had taken a part-time receptionist job again, trying to stay busy. Natalie paused before asking if I wanted to know how they talked about me now. I said maybe later. She said they swing between guilt and denial, mostly denial. I laughed softly. That sounded right. That night, I went through my bank statements and realized I had almost $30,000 saved since I stopped the monthly payments. I stared at the number and felt both proud and ashamed, like seeing a reflection I hadn't looked at in years. I had spent so long funneling everything outward, I had forgotten what stability looked like when it stayed with me. On Friday, after closing time, I stayed late at the center. The snow had started again, small dry flakes that looked like ash. The kids' artwork covered the walls, crooked and colorful. Ben's card with the blue truck was still taped to my office door. I sat at my desk and wrote the week's notes for each child, one by one, the small victories no one outside our circle would ever notice. While writing, I thought about the way Dad had said dead to me, how it had sounded like an ending. Now it felt more like a turning point. There was grief, yes, but there was also a strange relief in no longer chasing something that would never arrive. When I left the building, my coworker Eric was locking up. He asked if I wanted to grab dinner and said he hated eating alone on Fridays. I almost said no, but then I thought about how small my world had become and said sure. We went to a diner near the highway, the kind that smells like syrup and fried onions. We talked about nothing big. His parents lived in Arizona. His sister had just had a baby. He was thinking about getting a dog. For once, I didn't talk about my family. It felt freeing to sit across from someone who didn't know their shadows. When he dropped me off, he said I seemed lighter than the last time he saw me. Maybe it was just the snow light, I said. But his smile made me think it wasn't. Saturday morning, I found 2 new messages waiting. One from Mom, short and worried. "He's not doing well. Please don't ignore us." The other from Caroline, longer, defensive, full of sentences that tried to sound strong. "You broke his heart. You made him a laughingstock. Investors heard everything. We had to sell some assets. Are you happy now?" I read it twice, then deleted it. Happiness wasn't the word. Freedom was closer, but even that didn't fit yet. It was just quiet, the kind that doesn't echo anymore. That afternoon, I met Natalie for coffee at a small shop near the library. She looked tired, but cheerful. She told me Dad had gone to the doctor after a scare, but it turned out to be stress. She said Mom had convinced him to see someone about blood pressure. She said Caroline hadn't visited much lately, too busy putting out fires at the office. We sat by the window and watched the snow thin into rain. Natalie said Aunt Linda thought maybe this was a blessing in disguise, that families sometimes need a collapse to rebuild. I told her maybe collapse was the wrong word. Maybe it was clearing. She nodded. "That sounds more like it," she said. When I got home, there was another envelope under my door. No return address, but I recognized my dad's handwriting, still bold and slanted. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I carried it to the kitchen and stood there staring for a while before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. It started with my name, then paused for 3 blank lines, as if he had hesitated before continuing. The words were few. "I don't know what to say to you. I don't know what you want. I can't sleep." That was all. No apology, no anger, just the space between. I didn't cry. I folded the paper and placed it beside Mom's earlier letter. 2 sides of the same silence. For a moment, I felt the smallest pull toward them. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of their limits. They could not say what needed to be said. Maybe they never would. And I had to live my life without waiting for it. That night I walked to the park near my apartment. The river ran dark under a thin sheet of ice. I stood there until my breath came out in clouds and my hands stung from the cold. Across the water, the lights of downtown glowed in soft orange, blurred by mist. I thought about the house where the shouting had echoed, the envelopes, the fear, the pride. Then I thought about the classroom, the kids learning to shape sounds into words, each small triumph. It struck me that healing might not come as one clean moment, but as a collection of quiet choices stacked together until they form something that looks like peace. When I went home, I made tea and sat by the window again. Snow started to fall once more, soft as dust. My phone stayed silent. For the first time, that silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. I turned off the lamp and let the city light fill the room in its muted glow. Tomorrow, I'd drive to the center again. Monday would come, and life would keep unfolding. I didn't know if Dad would ever call, or if Mom would ever find the words she couldn't write, but I knew this much. I had stepped out of their story and back into my own. Outside, the snow thickened, covering everything in a pale, forgiving layer. The city dressed itself in lights again, and for the first time in my life, I noticed how gentle December can look when you stop holding your breath. 1 year passed like a long exhale. I stood outside the center with a staple gun in my hand and a poster tucked under my arm. Christmas fundraiser for Special Kids Center. I pressed the corners to the bulletin board in the front window and watched. People slow down to read. A woman with a knitted hat tapped the glass and gave me a thumbs up. I nodded back and felt a small lift in my chest that had nothing to do with applause. Inside, the tree we had decorated with paper stars leaned a little to the left. Ben reached up on his toes and straightened it while his grandmother pretended not to hover. He handed me a strip of red paper and said, "It was your turn, Miss Helen." His words came easier now, like a river that had remembered its path. I looped the strip into a chain and we added it to the branches. The room smelled like cinnamon from a plug-in and Elmer glue. I thought about last year and how everything had felt loud, like sirens. This year felt like a hymn sung under your breath, By noon, parents arrived with trays of cookies and nervous smiles. We lined the hallway with donation jars made from old peanut butter containers, wrapped in green paper. Eric set up a folding table with mugs and a slow cooker full of cocoa. He said we might actually hit our goal. I said I would be happy with half. We both laughed because hope has a way of making you generous with prediction. A little after 1, a camera crew from the local station showed up. A young reporter in a wool coat asked if she could film a segment about community programs. She said it would air during the evening news. I wiped glue from my hands and tried to smile without looking like I was, trying too hard. She asked what kept me going after a hard year. I told her that watching a child form a new sound is like watching a sunrise, slow and inevitable and tender. She asked if I had anything to say to families who were struggling through this holidays. I said to be kind to yourself and to build peace in small pieces. She thanked me and left with a wave. The kids went back to glitter and paper under the steady noise of Christmas. Music pulled low. Around 2:30, my phone buzzed with a new message. Merry Christmas. Helen, from Mom. No apology tucked inside, no plea attached. Just the sentence and a row of little tree emojis that made me smile despite myself. I typed back, wishing her a peaceful day, and told her we were raising money for first-time sensory tools and an outdoor play structure. I did not invite her. I did not close the door either. My finger hovered over the send, then pressed it. A few minutes later, she replied with a picture of a poinsettia on the dining room table. In the background, I could see the Good Runner and 2 plates set neatly side by side. I recognized the shape of my dad in a chair turned slightly away. I put my phone face down and let the moment be what it was. The fundraiser went better than we had planned. People from the neighborhood stopped in and left small bills in jars and wrote checks with careful handwriting. A man in a janitor uniform pressed a 20 into the smallest jar and told Ben he was doing a good job watching the cookie table. Ben saluted him with a crumb on his lip. I felt something warm move through the room that did not ask for any explanation. When we counted at the end of the afternoon, we had enough to order a set of weighted blankets and to start a fund for the playground. Eric whooped and the kids clapped even though they did not know why. Then clapped again because clapping feels good. After cleanup, I stood alone in the quiet classroom and turned off the string lights one by one. The room shifted from sparkle to soft dusk. I slid Ben's blue truck card a little higher on my door because the tape was tired. I locked the front and stepped into the early evening. The air was cold and smelled faintly of wood smoke. Downtown glowed in the distance, windows warm against the pale sky. On my way home, I stopped by the small florist on Pine Street. The front window was fogged with breath, and a tiny train circled a moss hill, over and over, as if time were a toy it could control. I bought a single white rose without thinking too hard. At the register, the owner tilted her head and asked if it was for someone important. I said yes. She wrapped it in brown paper and tied a thin ribbon around the stem. I did not mean to drive by my parents' house. Habit steered the car for a few blocks, and then I let it. The maple out front was bare and the front steps were clean. A warm square of light fell onto the snow from the living room. I parked across the street and held the rose in my lap. I should have kept driving. Instead, I sat with the engine off and watched the curtains move. After a minute, the door opened and my mother stepped onto the porch with a sweater pulled tight. She stood there as if she had felt me arrive. She did not wave. She did not call out. She took one careful step down, and another, and then stopped at the bottom. I got out of the car with the rose in my hand. We met halfway across the street. I could hear a far-off car hiss on wet pavement and a single bird scolding us from a dark branch. We were close enough to see the small lines around each other's eyes, and the way both of us have learned to stand a little taller in the last year. She looked at the rose, and then at me. No words, only a small nod that said, "I see you." I held out the flower and she took it like you take a fragile truth. Her fingers brushed mine and stayed a heartbeat longer than necessary. "He is inside," she said, without adding anything else. I nodded. I said I hoped he was well. She said he is quieter these days. Then we were quiet together. It did not feel like the old silence that demanded we pretend. It felt like a pause two people take when there is nothing safe to add. I told her about the fundraiser, I said we hit our goal. Her face brightened. Pride without envy. Relief without need. She said that was wonderful, and that I had always been stubborn in the best. Wait. I laughed and said stubbornness kept roofs from leaking and hearts from breaking. We both knew that last part was not always true, but it felt kind to say. A car turned the corner and washed us in headlights, then moved on. Mom glanced toward the house like she had a timer on the stove. She squeezed my hand once and said thank you for the rose. She said thank you for what you have built. I said thank you for coming outside. We stood a second longer while our breath made small ghosts in the cold. I got back into my car and watched her climb the steps. At the door she turned and lifted the rose slightly, then disappeared into the light. I sat there until the windows stopped holding her shadow. My mouth tasted like winter air, clean and almost sweet. On the way home, I passed the church on Martin, where the evening service had just let out. Older couples walked arm in arm down the steps, careful on the salt. A child dragged a sled across grass that was mostly brown, with a thin lace of frost. I felt a thread of tenderness for everyone with a complicated holiday and nowhere to put the extra weight. I parked in my lot and carried the leftover cocoa packets upstairs in my tote bag. The apartment was warm and quiet. I set the bag on the counter and turned off the kitchen light. The window brightened with the wash of city glow. I stood there and let the day settle into my bones. On the table sat a small stack of donation slips with names I would not remember and kindness I would. My phone buzzed with a news alert. The station had aired our clip. I watched myself on the tiny screen, my voice softer than I hear it in my own head. I talked about building peace in small pieces. I ended by thanking the town for showing up. Then the video faded to a car commercial, and I laughed out loud at the whiplash of life. I put the phone away and leaned my forehead to the cool window. Snow began again, barely there, like shy confetti. Across the street, a man carried a Christmas tree up 3 flights and stopped, twice, to breathe. I wanted to cheer for him. Instead, I whispered to myself that healing can be louder than hurt when you let it keep going. I turned from the window and sat on the edge of the couch. The quiet felt like a place I could live. Tomorrow, I would write thank you notes and order weighted blankets and call the city about permits for the playground. Maybe I will sleep in a little. Maybe I would make pancakes. The calendar would slide forward no matter what I did. That thought used to scare me. Tonight it felt like a gift. I folded my hands in my lap and listened to the heater murmur and the steady drip from a gutter outside. Then I let my eyes close and allowed the day to soften at its edges, ready to become a memory. Snow had already melted into the gutters when the new year came, leaving behind small salt rings and quiet streets. Life slipped back into its ordinary rhythm, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living under someone else's shadow. The center was thriving. Parents brought coffee in the morning, and the kids greeted me with laughter that reached all the way into my chest. Each day felt like stitching something back together, thread by thread. One afternoon in February, I received an envelope in the mail. There was no return address, but I knew the handwriting the moment I saw it. My dad's. I turned it over twice before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper and a photograph. It was the 3 of us, Mom, Dad, and me, taken in the old backyard when I was maybe 8. Dad's arm rested across my shoulders. The grass looked impossibly green. On the back of the photo, he had written in his careful, slanted script. I didn't know what I was losing until the quiet started echoing back. I stood there for a long time. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it wasn't anger either. It was a tremor of something human. I slid the picture onto the fridge with a magnet and stepped back. The hum of the appliance filled the space, steady and low. For a while, I let that be the only sound in the room. By spring, I had saved enough to start construction on the playground we had dreamed about for years. The city approved the permits faster than expected, and the local hardware store offered to donate materials. Every Saturday, volunteers from the neighborhood showed up with hammers and paintbrushes. Ben came too, wearing his favorite blue truck shirt and shouting orders like a foreman. Watching him, I realized that this messy, noisy act of building was the closest thing to faith I had left. The playground was finished in late May. On the morning of the opening, sunlight spilled across the grass, and ribbons fluttered from the new fence. Parents brought lawn chairs and coolers, and someone's uncle played guitar near the swings. When we cut the ribbon, the kids rushed forward like a tide, laughing, shouting, alive. I felt a lump rise in my throat. For so long, I had been measuring worth in the wrong direction, upward, toward approval. Now I saw that the real work had always been here, grounded, right in front of me. That evening, as I was cleaning up paper cups and stray streamers, a familiar car pulled up by the curb. My mother stepped out slowly, holding on to the door for balance. I froze, unsure whether to wave or walk away. She smiled a small, tired smile and started across the grass. When she reached me, she handed me a folded note. I thought of all the letters we had exchanged, all the words that never found their way out. She said softly that Dad wasn't well, but he wanted to come himself. Then she turned toward the car and motioned. Dad got out carefully, leaning on a cane I hadn't seen before. He looked smaller than I remembered, the kind of smaller that comes from surrender rather than age. He walked slowly until he stood a few feet away. His eyes flicked over the playground, the children, the bright blue slide glinting in the sun. He nodded once, almost to himself. "This is yours, isn't it?" he said. His voice carried a rasp I didn't recognize. I told him yes, that it was for the kids, for the families who needed somewhere safe to belong. He looked at me for a long time before saying, "I didn't make it easy to belong, did I?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, the man who had shaped so much of my strength, by denying it. Finally, I said, "You made it really easy to learn what kind of home I didn't want to build." He huffed out something that might have been a laugh or a sigh. Then he said, "I see that now." His hand tightened around the cane. "Your mother told me about the money. I should have thanked you." "You don't need to," I said quietly. "I'm okay now." He looked at the playground again, his eyes tracking the children as they climbed and swung and shouted. He said, "You did this without me." I said, "Not without you. Just not with your permission." He smiled then, small and strange, like he wasn't sure how to wear it. "You always were stubborn," he said. "That's from me." I nodded. "I'll take it." He stepped closer and reached out as if to shake my hand, but instead his palm brushed my shoulder. It was light, uncertain, but it stayed there long enough to mean something. He said, "I'm proud of you, Helen." The words landed like soft stones in water, rippling out in circles I didn't expect. Mom called from the car that he should sit down. He nodded and turned to go, but before he left, he said, "It's good work, what you're doing here." Then he got into the car and closed the door. I watched them drive away, the dust rising behind the wheels. My chest felt both heavy and lighter than it had in years. I didn't know if we would ever truly mend what had been broken, but maybe we didn't need to. Maybe it was enough that he had seen me, finally. Not as a child or an obligation, but as my own person. That night, the sun set slow and gold over the playground. I sat on one of the new benches with a thermos of tea and listened to the echo of laughter fading down the block. A soft breeze carried the smell of cut grass and something sweet from the nearby bakery. For once, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I just felt present, whole. Later, I walked home through the neighborhood, lights flickering on in windows one by one, people inside, moving through their small, ordinary lives. I thought of the long road that had brought me here, the humiliation, the silence, the truth finally spoken. All of it had shaped this moment of stillness. When I reached my apartment, I poured the last of the tea and sat by the window. Across the street, a child was pressing his face to the glass, watching snowflakes drift under a streetlight. I smiled without realizing it. If you've ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. You don't have to win every fight. Sometimes you just have to stop standing where you're not seen. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you're listening from. Outside, the first snow of the new winter began to fall, soft and forgiving, covering the city in a hush that sounded a lot like peace.